What if the reason people don't respect you is not because you're wrong, but because you keep trying to prove that you're right? We live in a world where we feel the need to explain everything, our choices, our boundaries, our decisions. We over-justify, we over-clarify, we over-defend. But here's the paradox. The more you explain yourself, the less people believe in your certainty. Because confidence doesn't ask for permission, and respect doesn't come from words. It comes from clarity of purpose. So the real question isn't, how do I make people understand me? The real question is, why do I feel the need to explain myself in the first place? Because the moment you stop explaining, you start standing. And when you stand, people start noticing. Explaining often begins as a good intention. You want to be understood. You want to avoid conflict. You want people to see your perspective clearly, so you add more detail, more reasons, more context. But somewhere along the way, that intention shifts. What starts as clarity slowly turns into justification. And justification, when repeated too often, begins to signal something deeper, self-doubt. When you truly believe in decision, it carries a certain calmness. There is a steadiness in your tone, a simplicity in your words. You say what needs to be said, and then you stop. There is no urgency to convince, no pressure to win approval. But when doubt creeps in, your words start to multiply. You feel the need to fill every gap, answer every possible question before it is even asked. Defend yourself against opinions that may not even exist. That is where over-explaining takes root. People are not just listening to what you say, they are observing how you say it. When your explanations become long and repetitive, it subtly communicates that you are seeking validation. It tells others that you are not fully anchored in your own choice. Even if your reasoning is perfectly logical, the delivery weakens its impact. The more you try to prove your point, the more it appears that you are unsure of it. There is a psychological pattern behind this. When you feel internally certain, you rely less on external agreement. But when you are uncertain, you look outward for reassurance. Over-explaining becomes a way to reduce your own anxiety. You keep talking, hoping that if others not agree or accept your reasoning, it will confirm that you are right. In that moment, you are not just communicating, you are negotiating your own confidence. This is why over-explaining often backfires. Instead of strengthening your position, it invites more scrutiny. It opens doors for unnecessary debate. It gives people more material to question, analyze, or challenge. A simple statement turns into a long conversation where your authority begins to shrink. Not because your idea is weak, but because your delivery makes it seem like it needs constant support. Confidence, on the other hand, is quiet. It does not rush to fill silence. It does not feel threatened by disagreement. It trusts that not everyone needs to understand or agree. When you speak with confidence, your words are measured. You express your decision clearly, and you allow it to stand on its own. That stillness carries weight. It signals that you are comfortable with your choice, even if others are not. Over-explaining also shifts the balance of power in conversations. When you keep adding reasons, you unintentionally place yourself in a defensive position. You act as if your decision requires approval, as if others hold the authority to validate it. This dynamic changes how people perceive you. They begin to see you as someone who needs to justify themselves rather than someone who owns their choices. It is important to recognize that not all explanations are harmful. Clear communication is valuable. Context can be necessary. But there is a difference between explaining once and explaining repeatedly. There is a difference between sharing information and seeking permission. The moment you cross that line, your message loses strength. Self-doubt does not always appear as hesitation. Sometimes it hides behind excessive words. It disguises itself as thoroughness, as politeness, as the desire to be transparent. But underneath it, there's often a fear of being judged, misunderstood, or rejected. Over-explaining becomes a shield against that fear, even though it ends up exposing it instead. Learning to recognize this pattern requires awareness. Pay attention to moments when you feel the urge to keep talking after you have already made your point. Notice when you start adding extra details that are not necessary. Ask yourself whether you are informing or defending. That small shift in awareness can help you regain control over your communication. There is strength in restraint. When you choose not to over-explain, you create space. Space for your words to land, space for others to process, space for your confidence to be felt rather than forced. You begin to communicate from a place of certainty instead of insecurity, and that change is noticeable. People respond differently when they sense confidence. They are less likely to question unnecessarily, less likely to challenge for the sake of it. Your words carry more authority, not because they are louder or longer, but because they are grounded. You no longer need to convince everyone. You simply need to be clear and consistent. Breaking the habit of explaining is not about becoming silent or distant. It is about trusting your own voice enough to let it be simple. It is about understanding that your worth and your decisions do not depend on how well you can justify them. When you reduce the need to explain, you reduce the influence of self-doubt. And as that doubt fades, something else takes its place, a quiet confidence that does not demand attention, but naturally earns it. A presence that does not rely on constant validation, but stands firmly on its own, a way of communicating that reflects belief rather than uncertainty. A shift that changes not only how others see you, but how you see yourself. Silence is often misunderstood. People associate it with weakness, hesitation, or lack of knowledge. In a world where everyone is trying to be heard, speaking more feels like strength. But real confidence does not compete for attention. It does not rush to fill every pause. It understands that silence, when used with intention, can communicate far more than words ever could. When you are truly confident, you do not feel the need to react to everything. You are not triggered by every opinion, every question, or every challenge. You choose your moments. You decide what deserves your energy and what does not. That choice creates a powerful presence because it shows that you are in control, not just of your words, but of yourself. Silence creates space, and space has weight. When you pause instead of responding immediately, people notice. It breaks the rhythm of typical conversation, where everyone is trying to speak over each other, trying to prove something. In that pause, attention shifts. People begin to focus on you, not because you are saying more, but because you are saying less. Your restraint makes your presence stronger. There is a difference between silence that comes from fear and silence that comes from confidence. Fearful silence avoids speaking because it is afraid of judgment. Confident silence chooses not to speak because it does not need validation. From the outside, both may look similar, but the energy behind them is completely different. People can sense that difference even if they cannot explain it. When you respond to every comment, you give others control over your attention. You allow them to dictate your reactions. But when you remain silent in moments that do not require your voice, you take that control back. You show that not everything deserves a response. That alone sets a boundary, one that does not need to be announced or explained. Silence also forces others to reveal more about themselves. When you do not immediately fill the conversation, the other person often continues speaking. They share more information, expose their intentions, or clarify their position. In many situations, silence gives you an advantage not through manipulation, but through awareness. You observe more, understand more, and react with greater clarity when you finally choose to speak. There is strength in being able to sit with discomfort. Many people talk simply to avoid awkwardness. They fill silence because it feels uncomfortable, because it creates uncertainty. But confidence is the ability to stay grounded in that uncertainty without rushing to escape it. It is the ability to remain calm when nothing is being said, to hold your position without feeling the need to explain or defend it. Silence can also act as a filter. When you do not respond immediately, you give yourself time to think. You separate emotion from intention. Instead of reacting impulsively, you respond with purpose. This shift changes the quality of your communication. Your words become more precise, more impactful, because they are not driven by urgency or pressure. In conversations, the person who speaks the most is not always the most respected. Often, it is the person who speaks with intention who chooses their words carefully. Who knows when to step back and listen? That balance creates authority. It shows that you are not trying to dominate the conversation, but you are also not losing yourself in it. Silence can communicate confidence in situations where words might weaken it. When someone challenges you, a calm pause can be more powerful than a long defense. When someone expects an immediate reaction, your stillness can shift the dynamic. It shows that you are not easily shaken, that you are not driven by the need to prove yourself in every moment. There is also a level of self-trust involved in silence. You trust that you do not need to explain everything. You trust that your decisions can stand without constant reinforcement. You trust that being understood is not always necessary for being respected. That trust reduces the pressure to perform in conversations, allowing you to show up more authentically. Silence is not about withdrawing from communication. It is about refining it. It is about removing the unnecessary and focusing on what truly matters. When you speak less, your words carry more weight. When you pause more, your presence becomes more noticeable. When you stop trying to control every moment, you gain control over what truly matters. In a world filled with constant noise, silence stands out. It is unexpected. It is powerful. It creates a contrast that draws attention without effort. And within that silence, there is a message, one that does not need to be spoken to be understood, one that reflects a deeper level of confidence, one that shifts how people perceive you, one that changes the way you engage with the world around you, one that transforms communication from something you chase into something you command. Boundaries are often seen as something that needs to be explained in order to be accepted. People feel the urge to justify why they said no, why they chose differently, or why they decided to step back. They believe that if they provide enough reasons, others will understand and respect their decision. But the truth is, the more you try to justify your boundaries, the more they begin to look negotiable. A boundary is not a request. It is not an invitation for discussion or approval. It is a decision about what you will accept and what you will not. When you treat it like something that needs explanation, you unintentionally weaken its authority. You shift it from being a clear line into something that can be questioned, debated, or even pushed. When you say no and immediately follow it with a long explanation, you send a subtle message. You suggest that your no is open to interpretation, that it can be reconsidered if someone challenges it enough. Even if that is not your intention, it changes how others perceive your stance. They begin to see your boundary not as a firm decision, but as something that depends on circumstances or persuasion. People often explain their boundaries because they want to avoid discomfort. They want to be seen as kind, reasonable, and understanding. They fear being judged as rude or uncooperative. So they add context, soften their words, and try to make their decision easier for others to accept. But in doing so, they sacrifice clarity. And without clarity, boundaries lose their strength. Clear boundaries are simple. They do not rely on long justifications or emotional explanations. They are direct and grounded. When you communicate them with confidence, they stand on their own. There is no need to convince others that your boundary is valid, because its validity comes from your decision, not from their agreement. There is a difference between being respectful and being apologetic.